Bible calls him righteous, but this guy just offered up his 2 virgin daughters to all the men of the city. You're a gatekeeper, but you're protecting the wrong thing. You're a gatekeeper and you're trying to protect the people that are here to protect you, and the children that God has given to you to protect, you offer them up to the men of the city. How does that work?
What do you believe? The people of the masses are deceived. You can go against the grain of flow with the mainstream. I keep it moving like the magi that's coming from the east. The wedding supper still ahead, gotta make it to the feast.
Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Luke McIntyre, and you are listening to the vertical discourse of God and Kings, where it's the glory of God to conceal a matter and the honor of kings to seek it out. Hope you are doing well. So if you saw the last podcast, you know that we've been talking about the 4 kings versus 5 in the Sodom Valley. And just as a quick recap for that, what you have is Gatekeeper. He is the head of a coalition. And for 12 years, everyone has been subject to him peacefully. In the 13th year, the 5 cities of the plain start to rebel. Those 5 cities of the plain include Sodom and Gomorrah. Right now, when we look at some of the names, we understand that there has been a lot of genetic alteration in humanity going on in these cities. When you look at some names like Bera and Bersha, who were some of the leaders, their names mean son of evil with iniquity. I think there was Shinab, whose name means the father of genetic alteration in humanity, which we talked about last week. And then they're going against Gatekeeper, Amraphel, who are in the land of Shinar, which is known as the country of 2 rivers. But those 2 rivers, when you look at the roots of the word, I believe those 2 rivers to be the bloodstream, because Shinar and Shinab have the same root of change or alteration. So it means the country of genetic alteration. So what I believe you have is, on one side, kings like Amraphel, kings like Gatekeeper, who are given over to demonic influence. And those demons are the dispossessed spirits of Nephilim who died in the flood. And I believe that they are going to war against Nephilim who survived the flood, who are starting to procreate and create new races of giants. Okay, that's what I believe is ultimately happening. When you look at the 5 cities of the plain, you see the Rephaim, you see the Zamzummim, you see the Emim, just a whole bunch of M's that are running around. And ultimately, I believe that God is using this war to destroy these Nephilim children, because in the book of Enoch, they're told that they will destroy one another before God wipes them out. So you get stories like the Titanomachy, in which they start to destroy one another. And then there's the flood that takes care of the rest of them. Well, now history is repeating itself, because now they're fighting each other in the Sodom Valley, destroying one another. But ultimately, you're going to get the destruction like you see in Sodom and Gomorrah. So the purpose of this podcast is to, 1, disclose what is going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. But almost more importantly than that, who is Lot and why is he important to the story that is interjecting all of this? OK, so we're going to start off talking about Lot, because it is important. I don't want you to see it as a tangent. We have to know who he is. He's not just the nephew of Abraham. He's a lot more than that. So get comfortable, because we're going to have fun with this one. So as I mentioned before in the last podcast, there's a lot of major events that are going on right now. The Tower of Babel, also known as Edamananki, has been incomplete. There's been the dispersion of tongues. Everybody is going their own way. And in the middle of this, we see God tell Abraham to leave Ur of the Chaldees and go to a land that he will show them. Now, when he leaves, Abraham has a brother named Haran who has died. But before Haran died, he had a son named Lot. And Lot has made a decision to go with Abraham. And I've seen a lot of like artistic spins or creative license in books about Abraham, where Lot decides, hey, I want to go with Uncle Abraham. And that's cool. I mean, ultimately, we don't know how it happened. But I believe that Abraham had already, quote unquote, adopted Lot as his son when this takes place. Now, we got to understand why this is important, because first of all, Abraham is the first person in the Bible that we see being recorded as rich, right? And not just rich in faith and hope and love. I mean, dude's got money. The dude's got cattle. He's got herds. He's got gold. He's got silver. The Bible didn't just say he's rich. It says that he was very rich. And Lot has inadvertently attached himself to the promises that God gave to Abraham. How do we know this? Because God told Abraham that he would turn him into a great nation. And when the children of Israel are leaving slavery and going into the promised land of Canaan that God has given to them, he tells them, hey, by the way, as you're going to the land that I've promised to give to you, you're going to be walking and going past Moab and Ammon. That land I have given to the descendants of Lot for their inheritance, and you cannot have it. That is important because by attaching himself to the promises God gave to Abraham, Lot made himself an inheritor of certain promises as well. So we know about Abraham and his promised seed. We know Lot, Moab, and Ammon. Those are his children. Do you know what's going on with Nahor? I don't know. He's not attached to the promise. We know that Haran died, but because Lot attached himself to Abraham, we see that he has land allotted to him as well. And God not only gives them land, he tells the children of Israel not to touch it. Okay, so we have to understand that. But because he is the adopted son of Abraham, as some commentaries say, at this point in time, Lot stands to gain everything that Abraham has if Abraham doesn't have any children. Now, obviously, he's probably not wishing that on his uncle, but he's going to be set up for life. But the problem that we run into is that Lot is already doing pretty well for himself. It seems like he becomes pretty rich to the point that his flocks and Abraham's flocks can no longer be contained within the same land, right? So Abraham and Lot have a conversation in which Abraham says to Lot, hey, let there be no more quarreling between your people and my people. The whole land is before you. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. Or if you go to the right, I'll go to the left. He gave Lot first choice. And it's interesting because the passage there says that Lot looked up and he beheld the Jordan Valley, that it was well watered like the Garden of Eden. And it's interesting to me because whenever I see that someone looked and saw, that's either something that's really good or it's something that's really bad. Eve looked up and she saw the fruit. The fruit had already been there. She'd been looking at it. But in this passage, when she looks up and sees the fruit, there is a fleshly logic that is in place. And we kind of see the same thing with Lot, right? We can't necessarily fault him for it because if he didn't go that way, Abraham was going to go that way to some degree. But he looks and he says that he's going to go down towards the Jordan Valley, and that's where he's going to pitch his tent down near Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, in this passage, we learned that Sodom and Gomorrah are bad and that God hates these cities, but we don't know why just yet. So what is it about Sodom and Gomorrah that's so bad, right? Well, like I said before, there's genetic alteration, and technically we could just leave it there because that's a pretty big deal. There's genetic alteration that is taking place, and it's an abomination to God because, again, these Nephilim hybrids are the children of fallen watchers and humanity. These are breeds that were never supposed to exist, and they are tyrants compared to the rest of humanity. They're wiping out humanity. And you got to understand, when God tells the Israelites to wipe out a certain people, it's not just because he's unfair or he hates humanity. Actually, when we understand the context, we understand that he's trying to give humanity its best chance to survive. But the problem is we continuously reject him, and we continuously say that he's unfair when all he's trying to do is preserve our way of life. But we keep getting in bed with the devil and creating the instruments of our own destruction. Anyway, when we look at the word sodomy, that's kind of like the first place that my mind goes to. So what is sodomy? The first thing you have to understand is that the definition of sodomy has been softened quite a bit, right? When you go online, it says that sodomy is the practice of unnatural sexual acts that don't produce offspring. They're saying that that's what sodomy is. I get that argument. My problem is because humanity is so depraved and there's a whole bunch of things going on. This is like, well, why isn't God wiping out the world now? Why isn't God wiping out every city, every town in America? Why isn't he going to every other country and wiping them out now? Right? I think we're minimizing what happened in Sodom to things that we can understand or comprehend or make sense in our minds as we understand the world today. So when you go back to the Latin root of the word, it says that the definition of sodomy is the sin of Sodom. But if you don't know what the sin of Sodom is, you're not really getting down to the root of it. Now, some people would say like, oh, it's bestiality. Well, it very well could be. I think that could be part of it. And a lot of people say like, well, we know what it is. We can go and look at the book of Jasher. The book of Jasher tells us what's going on. And again, some people consider the book of Jasher canon. I'm not ready to accept it as canon yet. The reason I say that is because, again, I see things that don't line up with scripture in it. I see places that the book of Jasher and the book of Jubilees don't match with one another, and then they don't match with the Bible in the 66 book canon that we have now. I like to read them because we understand tradition, and I'm not throwing out everything in those books because I think there's some good context there. But I think we have to understand that there is a grain of salt that we have to read them with. I don't give them the same level of authority that I give to the other 66 books of the Bible. I don't give them the same level of credibility that I give to the book of Enoch. Be that as it may, this is from Jasher chapter 18, verses 13 and 14. This is their definition of sodomy. In those days, all the people of Sodom and Gomorrah and all the whole 5 cities were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. And their wickedness and crimes were in those days great before the Lord. And they had in their land a very extensive valley, about half a day's walk, and in it there were fountains of water, and a great deal of herbage surrounding the water. And all the people of Sodom and Gomorrah went there 4 times in the year, with their wives and children, and all belonging to them, and they rejoiced there with timbrels and dances. And in the time of rejoicing, they would all rise and lay hold of their neighbors' wives, and some the virgin daughters of their neighbors. And they enjoyed them, and each man saw his wife and daughter in the hands of his neighbor, and did not say a word. And they did so from morning to night, and they afterward returned home, each man to his house, and each woman to her tent. So they always did 4 times in the year. So that's one of the things that they talk about when they're talking about their sexual depravity. Now, do I believe that could have happened? Absolutely. I have no reason to believe that didn't happen, but I do not believe in any degree that is the extent of what happened in Sodom. In fact, I know it's not the full extent because when we go to the New Testament, we learn a little bit more about what's going on in Sodom. So when we look at the book of Romans chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, it literally lists the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah, and it talks about how men left the natural use of women and burned in their lust toward one another. That's one thing that it says. But another thing that it says is that they went after strange flesh. Now, when we look at the word strange flesh there, we understand that they're talking about of a different quality or different kind. Now, when something is of a different kind, it means that it's not of the same species, right? When we look at the Genesis account and God makes all these creatures to reproduce after their kind. What does that mean? That means that monkeys are always going to have monkeys. Horses are always going to give birth to horses. That means whales are always going to give birth to whales, right? So humans are always supposed to give birth to humans. But if they're going after a different kind, that means that they are going outside of their species. And I know that modern science now wants to say, well, we're all in the family of blah. Like, I'm not getting into all that, right? We're looking at something that's of a different kind. And when we look at the angels coming into the city of Sodom, we understand that there's more there. So who were the men of Sodom burning in their lust for that could be of a different quality of flesh? Right? We see it in Genesis 6, the sons of God and the daughters of men sleeping together. So now, yet again, we see men and women being drawn to creatures that are outside the human species. Why is all of this important? Because when Chedorlaomer defeats the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and he takes captives, Lot gets taken captive along with them. Now, fast forward, Abraham hears about this and he takes 318 men, all born in his house. They go to war and they beat all of Chedorlaomer's forces. I think it's amazing speaking to how powerful a small force can be with the army of God. But I think something else happened in this transaction that we need to understand. This is the first time in post-Diluvian history that Nephilim have actually seen a force from the earth defeat them that was not demonic power or Nephilim influence. This is a problem. I think that puts Abraham on blast in a lot of ways. And a lot of these Nephilim are probably going to put tabs on him now because there was a prophecy that was made in the garden that the seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent. Now, all of a sudden, we've got a human person uninfluenced by Nephilim blood that has just crushed giants and giant killers. Now, Abraham has just been put on their radar. So this is interesting because after Abraham frees Lot and all of Sodom, the king of Sodom comes over and says like, hey, you can take, all the goods and everything with you, but leave the people with me. And Abraham says no. Now, this is important because if he would have done that, Abraham would have come into some level of covenant with the king of Sodom. And anybody that you come into covenant with, you have to be careful because you're tied to them, right? This whole idea of cutting covenant. And Abraham said in that meeting that I have sworn with my hand up before God that I will take nothing from you all the way down to a shoe strap. I will have nothing to do with you. You can give these people over here their share or whatever. But as far like, I'm not going to let anyone say that you made me rich. And I am also not going to make any covenant with you. Now, meanwhile, in the same chapter, he does make covenant with Melchizedek, who is the priest of Salem and king of God Most High. They break bread and wine, which I believe is a foreshadowing of Jesus's body being broken and his blood being spilled, right? That's a great tangent. It's a tangent. We have to understand that the next time we see Lot, it says that he is sitting in the gate. When you're sitting in the gate, you're a judge. You're someone of prominence. You're someone of influence. And therefore, you are some level of a gatekeeper, right? And the way that I believe this happened was Lot's probably using his influence as the nephew of Abraham. Hey, you know that guy that saved us from all these other guys over here? That's my uncle. And they're like, oh, you guys know each other? Okay, cool. Is there some level of prominence that we can give to this guy? I don't know that it happened that way, but it would not surprise me if Lot's position to Abraham gave him some level of influence in Sodom, because keep in mind, later on, the people accused him and said, you came here and made yourself a judge over us. So he had to do something to posit himself as a leader, that they weren't necessarily gung-ho and jumping about, but he had some type of leverage that they didn't necessarily agree with. So we see Lot sitting in the gate, and he's a judge here. Now, I've been so perplexed about this section, because I'm just like, he's a judge in the gate, but the Bible calls him a righteous man. How is that possible? And if that's possible with him, is it possible in our generation that there's so many people that are righteous that are sitting in the gates of Gomorrah and sitting in the gates of Sodom? I actually want to read that section. We're going to go into Genesis 19 just to learn a little bit about that. And I'm just going to start at verse 1. It says, the two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. My lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night, and then go on your way early in the morning. Now, I think it's interesting that as soon as he saw them, he bowed down. He realizes that these are some men of prominence. Now, understand, he's sitting in the gateway, right? Not just literally, but also metaphorically, he's sitting in the gate. And he sees these men, he bows down, realizing that they are of a different quality or kind than him, so that he bows down to them, much in the same way that Abraham saw these three men coming to him and he rose to make a meal for them, right? So he says, you can wash your feet and spend the night and then go on your way early in the morning. No, they answered, we will spend the night in the square. But he insisted. And there's other versions that says that he pressed them. He insisted so strongly that they did go with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Now, keep in mind, he fed them. So people say, oh, angels don't eat food. You see them eating food in the first book of the Bible. So let's just go ahead and squash that argument. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Man. I didn't even think about this. They ate bread without yeast because yeast represents pride, and the sin of Leviathan and the sin of all these watchers, the sin of all these Nephilim is pride. So it makes sense that they're eating bread without yeast. They're coming here in full humility. They have to be coming in humility if they came on assignment and they submit to Lot's request, right? That's amazing. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They said every man from the city surrounded. So everybody knows, it's not just two random men. They know that the quality of these men is different, and they know that they are angelic beings. They know that they are celestials. They called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them. Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind him and said, "No, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof." There's another version that says that for this is the reason that they came under the roof of my house. Now, I take a lot of occasion with this. I take a lot of issue with this because Lot's seen them at the gate. He's walked them all the way through. He's had an entire conversation with them. He's fed them. He's brought them into his house, and he does not know why they are here. How do you get all the way through the city, sit down and have conversation with them, and still not know why they are here? Right? This is a righteous man. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of Balaam when Balaam was on his donkey and the donkey is trying to keep him away from the angel. It's like you already know in God that you can't do anything that God doesn't tell you, but you're still blinded by your own ambition. Lot is the same way, right? The Bible calls him a righteous man, but he is so blind, he doesn't even know why these men are here yet. And he's been entertaining them all night. Now, this is the other thing. The Bible calls him righteous, but this guy just offered up his 2 virgin daughters to all the men of the city. This is amazing. You're a gatekeeper, but you're protecting the wrong thing. You're a gatekeeper and you're trying to protect the people that are here to protect you, and the children that God has given to you to protect, you offer them up to the men of the city. How does that work? Lot has his own level of self-righteousness, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more here. "Get out of our way," they replied. "This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them." So right there, they're admitting that their plans are of no good, right? And of abuse. They kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for a second because right now I want to do a cross reference, and I think that this is a big deal. This is from 2 Peter chapter 2, starting with verse 6. Actually, we'll start with verse 4. It says, "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the I don't want to read this version. What is going on? If he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah by burning them to ashes and made them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly, and if he rescued Lot, a righteous man, who is distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless. For that righteous man living among them day after day was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard." It's amazing. I'm like, but he just offered up his daughters. How is he righteous? Further down, it says in verse 18, "For they mouthed empty, boastful words, and by appealing to the lustful desires of the flesh, they entice people who are just escaping from those who live in error." And one of the words that it says for them is presumptuous. Now, this is why this is interesting. When the angels tell Lot, "No, we're going to stay in the square," it says that Lot pressed them so much that they came to the house that he was in and stayed. I looked up the word pressed there, and it said that it meant presumptuous. So the people of the city are boastful and presumptuous. Lot in this situation is presumptuous. Lot, who has become a gatekeeper, Lot, who has made a covenant with these people and living here, has become like the people he has covenanted himself to. Yes, his soul is righteous, but he gets 100% of all the depravity that he made a covenant with, right? That's why he's vexed, because your soul is righteous, but your covenant is not. And we do the same things a lot of times. Like our soul is like, it's righteous, but it's like, yes, we're going to heaven and God loves us and all that. But we've made so many covenants with things that our life is not a reflection of the abundance God wants us to have because of things that we've made covenant with. Right. I mean, it could be as simple as that relationship that you're in, the church that you go to, that brotherhood that you're a part of. I mean, it could even be to, the covenant to like, oh, like you didn't read the ingredients on the back. They said it may cause this. That's cool. You still went ahead and took this prescription, and now you've made a covenant with those things. Right. I know it's probably a little bit deeper and a little bit more intricate than most people think about, but it's still true. Covenants mattered then and now. And next week, I'm going to be talking a lot more about Abraham and some of the covenants you see him making and not making. So now we're seeing the depravity of Sodom, and we're seeing Lot as a gatekeeper. It looks like he set himself up as a judge, and now it's all about to come crashing down on his head. But the interesting thing is, these men press in, he offers his daughter, and then the men pull him back into the house. They walk out and they strike all the men of the city with blindness. Then they tell Lot, get your family and get out of here. It says the two men said to Lot, do you have anyone else here? Son-in-laws, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place. Now remember, God told Abraham that he would not destroy the city if he could find 10 righteous people. He could not find 10 righteous people. And I'm convinced that Lot was the only one in his family that was righteous. But because he was righteous, God is willing to spare his entire family. It says the outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his son-in-laws. Oh, look, somebody else got an invitation, who were pledged to marry his daughters. He said, hurry and get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city. But his son-in-laws thought he was joking. This is interesting because we have to understand that not everybody that receives an invitation to get out of a bad situation is going to leave it. It's also interesting, too, that your daughter-in-laws are engaged, but you just offered your daughter-in-laws to all the men in the city, which, wait a minute, the Bible just said that all the men in the city were out here wanting to sleep with the angels. Well, that by reason of deduction has to mean that your son-in-laws are out here wanting to have sex with these angels as well. So it's like, what is going on here? Your daughters are engaged, but you're still offering them up to all the men of the city, and the men of the city, including your son-in-laws, are out here wanting to sleep with angels. There is so much confusion and stuff all around. It's no wonder that God wants there is no level of morality, right? There's no level of morality. So the angels tell Lot, get your people and get out. With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, hurry, take your wife and your daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished. When he hesitated, the men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. The Lord was merciful to them in the fact that the angels had to grab him by his hand and pull him out of a city that they've already been told is about to be destroyed. Isn't it amazing that we can fall in love with the very thing we know is going to kill us? He's a righteous man. He knows the city's going to be destroyed. He knows these people want to kill him and do worse to him than they want to do to the angels, but he's hesitating to leave. Why? Covenant, right? The depravity of Gomorrah is so great, but it's got a chokehold on him, right? It's a stronghold in his heart, as it is with his family as well. Now, this is another thing we have to understand. We don't know if Lot was married before he went to the city. Was he married to his wife and they went in there and they had children? Did he already have children and they went in there? Or did Lot meet his entire family there? Because his family is completely immersed in the depravity. This is just normal life to them. As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, flee for your lives. Don't look back and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains or you will be swept away. Now, what the plain of the Jordan, right? The Pentapolis. All of these cities are supposed to be destroyed. Don't be anywhere near them, lest you be destroyed as well. But Lot said to them, no, my lords, please. Your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown a great kindness to me in sparing my life. But I can't flee to the mountains. This disaster will overtake me, and I'll die. Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it is small. Let me flee to it. It is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared. He said to him, very well, I will grant this request too. I will not overthrow the town you speak of, but flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it. That is why the town was called Zoar, and Zoar means insignificant. Anytime detours are made, there is a ramification. Lot begs and prays like, oh, can we go to Zoar? Can we go to Zoar? The angel says, yes. Then they don't go. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So they're leaving. And then God begins to rain down hellfire, right? That's why Sodom means burning with sulfur and hailstones. And Gomorrah means submerged, because the cities were submerged by the wrath of God. Now, we all know that Lot's wife looked back, right? And she turned to a pillar of salt. But I don't think we understand how significant that is. You have to understand. She was a human and she just turned into a pillar of salt. And there's a whole lot of depictions of, oh, this rock that's standing, that's white and everything like that. It's like, that's Lot's wife. This is what will happen to you. I don't believe that. For her to instantly turn into salt, I don't believe she just turned white. I believe that her body was petrified immediately. So she didn't turn to white salt. She turned into pink salt. Have you ever noticed? First of all, pink salt, where does it come from? It comes from the mountains, like the Himalayas, right? Himalayan pink salt. It always comes from a higher altitude. Have you ever noticed that pink salt, when cut open, looks a lot like body tissue of a very large size? Perfectly preserved, like it looks like ham. It looks like beef. It just looks like perfectly preserved tendons and muscle tissue, just petrified. Now, when you look at the story of the book of Enoch, when you look at Genesis 6, when you look at what's going on there, the angels cut down the trees, but still these Nephilim are trying to escape the wrath of God, and they go to the heights, right? They go to the mountains, and that's where they die. But even before that, it looks like there were places that their bodies were just petrified immediately, right? And I mean, there's videos, there's footage of this all around the world. People now want to say that it's AI. People 20 years ago wanted to say that it was Photoshop. People have never wanted to believe it in our generation, but all the evidence is there. But when you look at the tissue, and when you look at the makeup of this pink salt, and then you put that alongside the story of Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt, God's wrath coming down on a lot of these other creatures, all of a sudden, these petrified rocks and this pink salt seem to be a lot more linked than we give them credit for. So keep that in mind. Now, Lot's wife has just been petrified and she turns to a pillar of salt. He's terrified. He just begged for mercy to go to the city of Zoar, and then he does not go. Instead, he flees to the mountains. And because they're in the mountains, his daughters think that there are no more men in the world. And so we have to procreate. Like, it's up to us, girl. We're going to have to repopulate the entire earth. Now, the other thing we have to keep in mind is that this probably may not have been as abnormal to them as we might think. Yes, they got their father drunk, but maybe that's because their father has some level of righteousness that they don't possess. He wouldn't go along with it. Like, it's not weird for us. It's not weird for me to say to my sister, hey, let's both get our father pregnant. That's our level of depravity. And so that's what they do. They get Lot drunk. They both sleep with him and they both get pregnant by him. And so it's interesting. The angels show them mercy and say, go to this place. And then they don't go. And out of that, they're ill-informed, misinformed, or just want to give into the last remnant of sexual desire that comes from Sodom and Gomorrah. And what happens? They give birth to Ammon and Moab. Right now, again, God is still faithful. And so they have an inheritance around the promised land. But they are the enemies of Israel as time goes on. Oh, I forgot to mention one other thing, too. So we don't find the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah anymore. But right around the Dead Sea, which is where they used to be, it's like it's the densest place. Like nothing can sink there. Right. Because of nothing can live there either because of the level of salt. Like you could jump into it and you just everything would float. Right. I've also seen videos of people like they were floating in this pond or in this pool, and they're just like they've got this beautiful powdery stuff, and it's like this major attraction. Like, man, where is this beautiful place? And I'm looking at that. It's like, God, is it possible that they're sitting there just swimming and floating, and drifting down river in the remains of this ancient city? And I think it's amazing that history doesn't point back to this great travesty more than it does, because when you look at the biblical account and when you look at other accounts outside of it, it's very evident to me. And then you go back to the whole pink salt thing. It's very evident to me that the corruption that we saw in Sodom was real, but more importantly, it's still going on. And the narrative that is being pushed doesn't want us to know that. I'm getting sidetracked. So anyway, I just really wanted to point to the interplay of the story of Lot, the depravity of Sodom and Gomorrah, and why Sodom and Gomorrah had to be destroyed. God has already made a promise that he's going to crush the head of these things. And he doesn't just do it at one time. There's a continuous process of, they're like roaches, man. It's like they get destroyed and then somewhere one of them will get away and then they'll breed again. And understand, like we understand, God has already won the battle. Jesus died on the cross. He lives forevermore. The battle has already been won, but the enemy, even in today's age, is still fighting to gain ground. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the importance of covenants. And I think the best way to do that is to talk about Abraham. So we're going to flip to the other side of this coin next week and talk about who Abraham was in this whole transaction. I hope you found this useful. Can't wait to talk again. Till next time, take care.